Interesting. So Michelle, how did we get here? Like, what's the history to how America got to this place with this whole Roe v. Wade conversation?
Sure. There's a long history of abortion. It's been going on for hundreds, if not thousands of years. As it pertains to the United States, though, and my legal history is shaky, so I may have to turn to Amy for assistance if you ask me any questions beyond what I'm saying now. um, but as far as abortion in North America, and particularly what becomes the United States goes, abortion is not criminalized until about the 1820s, when we transitioned from common law to states making their own laws about abortion. And even then, kind of the deciding or the turning point at which it's criminalized is when a woman feels a quickening, which means that she can detect the movements of the fetus, right? So this is further into pregnancy than we can detect today, which is the pregnancy tests and the things that science has given us. And abortion largely is criminalized around that time of quickening, right? So if you get an abortion after that time of quickening under common law in the colonies and in the early republic, that is illegal. After the 1820s, states began to pass laws that slowly, up until about the 1860s, make abortion possibly illegal at any point in the pregnancy. So that's a change that happens gradually over the course of the long 19th century. In the 1860s, particularly after the Civil War, American gynecology is also taking off. The American Medical Association comes together at that point, and there's a professionalization of medicine that leads a lot of individuals, and particularly men who are practicing gynecology professionally, to have an additional incentive to criminalize abortion, right? They're wanting to push people away from turning to midwives or to faith healers or other religious leaders as sources of medical or scientific authority to themselves, right? As kind of the guardians of women's reproductive health. And so in the 1860s, we see another particular effort to criminalize abortion, again, as a way of kind of safeguarding the medical profession.
Hold on. Are you saying that whoa. So you're saying that the professionalization of medicine, which happened to also go in line with like the malinization of doctoring women's bodies, that kind of correlated with the what making abortions illegal?
It certainly is one factor in pushing that agenda forward, right? If we can call it an agenda.
Fascinating.
I would also note here that American gynecology is, as a medical profession, is largely born in the United States as a result of white Southern male physicians who go down to the American South and basically practice on enslaved Black women, right? So they're going in and they're trying to figure out, how do we repair a vaginal or anal fistula? And they get permission from enslavers to work on Black women's bodies, right? And the things that these women go through are just horrific. And so that, there's a racial component as well. You see the United States diversifying racially and ethically because of immigration as well. White American women's birth rates are plummeting at this point, and the birth rates of immigrant families, on the other hand, are skyrocketing. And so there are some concerns here about what the demographic future of the United States looks like. So these are concerns that are coming up as well at the end of the 19th century, after the Civil War. I would also say that abortion, when it's being talked about around this time, is sometimes discussed, or largely, I would say, discussed in terms of policing premarital or extramarital sexual activity, right? So if you're getting an abortion, it's most likely because you had sex outside of marriage and you got pregnant, and this is linked with conversations about infanticide as well, right? Infanticide taking place in the context of women having had a child outside of marriage, and this is going to put a really large burden on the woman. It's going to ruin her socially. And so abortion is tied in with all these issues. So if we fast forward to about the 1960s, American evangelicals are, and I'm like skipping over lots of history here, but I'm trying to be quick. In the 1960s, American evangelicals are making a comeback to American public life. They had disappeared in the 1920s, particularly after they're kind of like torn apart in American media over the Scopes trial, which is a case in Tennessee about the teaching of evolution in public schools. And they just kind of largely disappear from American public life and especially American politics. Well, in the 1960s and particularly in the 1970s, American evangelicals decide that they've had enough and America is kind of falling to pieces and we need to restore kind of the Christian foundation of the United States. And so they gather around this term that they call family values. And they say, we need to restore family values to America. And this is a three-prong attack on things that are happening in American society at that time. And they particularly go after feminism, abortion, and gay rights. And so now the rhetoric is, well, if you promote abortion or if you're pro-choice, and mind you, like all the Roe v. Wade stuff has just happened, if you support abortion, then you are against families, right? And you're against family values, and you are a sick person who is attacking families in America. You are perverted or hypersexualized, you know, like deviant in some way. And this is the rhetoric that starts to come out. And this is when American Christians really begin to gather around abortion as kind of this public issue that is threatening their way of life, that's threatening Christianity in the United States. And I use the term American Christians specifically because this is involving not only Protestants, but also Catholics. Now, the really great, or the really interesting thing, I don't think this is great, the really interesting thing is that up until this point, American Catholics and American Protestants had not really worked together politically because of the historic kind of anti-Catholic sentiment amongst Protestants in America as well as in Europe. But American evangelicals, Jerry Falwell, for example, moral majority folks, come together and they say, we really need to push this agenda politically. And so we're going to reach our hand across the divide and begin working with American Catholics, of whom like Phyllis Schlafly, who's a Catholic, is a prime example, right? Opposing the ERA, you know, pro-life. So I'll just end this with one more comment, which is when we think about debates over abortion, over Roe, and now Dobbs in the United States, we do have to understand that this is arising out of the context of the 1960s and 1970s, right? That this is a concerted, not only like social and moral concern that American Christians have, but it's a political movement, right? And it is very much intertwined with, I would even argue, Christian nationalism. So whatever opinion we hold as Adventists, you know, we of all American Christians, right, are against Christian nationalism because of our views on prophecy in America. We need to be careful that we're not just kind of accepting the status quo in terms of how we talk about abortion as kind of a political, like, callback to moral majority issue, but we need to be approaching it from a biblical worldview, not a necessarily evangelical, political, religious one.
You know,